So, hello everybody. Today we are going to be continuing our conversation about personality X. But before we go into today's subject, if you watched the previous video, you know we've been talking about a religion and been talking about the song Losing My Religion. And I thought I was done with the subject, but somebody posted a comment that I absolutely have to share. It was just so good. It comes from Larissa. By the way, if you're watching, I want to give credit where credit is due. And I do think it's absolutely glorious observation. And it puts me to shame in a sense. So I want to share this. So let me share my screen and I'm going to show you the screenshot that Larissa sent. So she sent this picture and her comment was, I love the morph between the Cupid arrow and hanging on the cross association. That's totally me in the corner. Wouldn't this be God syndrome? So I didn't even notice this, but I think it's a very, very good observation on Larissa's part. And I think this is awesome because a person who is a personality X or in a X relationship, in a relationship with a personality X person, usually does have their heart into it and they are love struck or have been in the beginning of this relationship. So Cupid arrow is very much in order here. And we've been talking a lot about associations. So her association is, like the crucifix, you see Christ on the cross, which I think, that is very very substantiated association. But what she's talking about, God syndrome, is another subject that we've covered for those of you who are not in that, is that this is something that we all have. And obviously, God syndrome is not a good thing, number one, because it's not reality, right? You're not God. So if you have delusions that you're somebody who you are not, at whatever level, that is not normal psychology. I mean, if it's your delusion that you're king of France, that's worse. But, God syndrome kind of falls under the same category. A lot of people who do have religious background associate that with what is termed in many religions the fall. So when Adam ate of the apple, that was the fall of the mankind, and it was all under the flag of you shall be like gods. So that was kind of like, the first sin, quote unquote, but, all comes to the same, bottom line is that, God syndrome is going to be detrimental to your success for whatever reason. But we tend to see God syndrome as usually a person who's, wants to be in control, a control freak, everybody look at me, everybody listen to me, I am, I can do it, I will do it, and whatnot. But there is the flip side of God syndrome. Depending on your personality type, there is 16 different personalities. 8 are introverted personalities. 8 are extroverted personalities. It's kind of like 2 major categories, and that breaks down from there. So an extrovert, is your well-known God syndrome, where you, portray yourself as a miniature God of sorts and expect treatment accordingly. But the flip side, on the introverted side of God syndrome, is to climb on the cross and die for the whole world because you're gonna save the whole world. If not the whole world, then at least the select people that you're doing it for. So that is something that often gets missed in the picture, but it's just the flip side of the coin, and it's still the same God syndrome. which, as I've been saying, not something that you want to nurture or encourage. It's something that you would want to keep under control and, overcome, as much as possible, because that's not the way to be. So and when you're in a personality X type of relationship, that comes into play very significantly. Let me sacrifice myself to this person because of why specifically? The only answer is because that's God syndrome behind it. That is not going to do anybody any good, neither you nor him, nor your children, nor relationship. So I'm going to stop here as far as that goes. That's a separate discussion that we can have on the group. But I figured I would share. Thank you, Larissa. That was a very good comment. I really like the insight. And I think talking about personality X in terms of God syndrome was a very welcome addition. So that's that. That's the comment that I wanted to go over, but let's get back to our discussion today. And what we are going to be talking about today is one of the signs of personality X, which you probably wouldn't even consider a sign of personality X. So let's go over over the details, because what we are trying to do, what our group has been on a mission to accomplish in a recent few sessions, is define and diagnose personality X. So how do you know for sure if you're in a relationship with that type of person? Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not so obvious. And as I've shared before, somehow denial is a symptom of that kind of relationship. In my opinion, that denial is fed a lot by the mainstream, more commonplace approach is that once you realize that you're in a narcissistic relationship, your only option is to leave. And you don't want to leave, so you go in denial. Well, good news is you don't have to leave. So hopefully, that would give you a little bit more strength in battling the denial here, but it's still a symptom, unfortunately. It's just the way it is. But so when we talk about personality X, which is a lot of times, not a lot of times, I mean, it's the same term, a narcissist and personality X is the same personality. It's just I choose to define it differently because, as I've mentioned many times before, I feel narcissist is misleading. So when I'm going to use this, just because that's what most people are used to, but that's one of the side of personality X is the manifestation of him as being a narcissist. And when we think of a narcissist, we think of this, person who is all into himself, who is very charismatic, who wants all the attention. And when we are up against the diagnosis, that is usually what we measure that person by. But is that all there is to it? That's my question. So let's go over this and see if we could uncover maybe some details about this. So let me ask you guys, what are some telltale signs of personality X or narcissist? What comes to mind?
I'll just go ahead and say definitely a huge ego. They see themselves as perfect. They act like they can't do anything wrong.
Oh, right, exactly. So this is a very commonplace perception, as I've just mentioned. So let's break it down a little bit. So first is a huge ego. So it's all about themselves, right? That's why we call them a narcissist. They're all into themselves. It's me, 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 me. They see themselves as perfect. So they can't do anything wrong. They have very hard time admitting when they do something wrong. Everything that happens is your fault somehow. I mean, if they backed out of the driveway and bashed in your car, it's still your fault because you parked it wrong. You know, even if you parked it properly, you still parked it wrong. You were over the line somehow. So they are perfect. And so they would minimize what they've done, and they would always exaggerate how you reacted or what you have done. And they act, you know, act the part, right? So but do you think that all those three things are necessarily one and the same? You know, like a huge ego, thinking you're perfect, acting like you will not accept any responsibility for any of your action. Is it always, you know, the same thing? Let's ask Aima. Are these the same, you think?
Well, I think it's not one and the same exactly, but it's more like a natural chain of events. Like if you're so convinced that you're perfect, then wouldn't you do everything to preserve that image, to keep that huge ego intact?
Oh, right. However, what is important to remember here is that one thing is thinking you're perfect. And another thing is if it's making other people think you're perfect. And that is very important. This is kind of what I was looking for here in asking the question if they're the same or not, is having a huge ego and thinking you're not doing, you know, anything wrong, and acting that part, because you may think you're not doing anything wrong, but would you necessarily act in a way that substantiates your belief that you're not doing anything wrong? Um, Personality X are people who are very much into what other people think about them. And so that's where I draw a differentiation between personality X and a narcissist. Maybe not so much differentiations. Again, I want to emphasize it's the same type of personality, but I guess it's probably more why I wouldn't call them a narcissist and I prefer a personality X, because I think the term narcissist leaves that part out, is that a personality X person is really not in love with themselves. In fact, they're very insecure. Their self-esteem is basically non-existent, but they act that way. And they act that way is because they're insecure, and because unless they project an image out there that they feel people are going to like and accept, if they don't project an image and if they're just the way they are, nobody's going to like them, because they're such a horrible person, because they can never do anything right and they know it. So unless they make everybody believe that there's something different, everybody's going to see through it. Everybody's going to hate them. Everybody's going to think they're really boring. They're not going to have anything to do with them. So that's why they are constantly on a mission to create the right image of themselves, contrary to what they actually think. And if they always acted like they are perfect and they can do nothing wrong, they know from experience and from how people react, we learn our behaviors as we grow up. So we know what, hey, if I do something nice for people, they're going to respond. If I go to my teacher and I bring in a gift, the teacher may be, they may give me a good grade, or, they'll be nice to me. So that's how things work. So, personality X, they're still intelligent people. They've got human brain and they can see how things work and they learn those behaviors. So, they know that people tend to not like somebody who is always right, who is always perfect, and who's got, like, even what we've mentioned earlier, a God syndrome. We've turned off by that. They know that from experience. But I mean, would you actually like someone who acted all high and mighty all the time? Let me ask you.
Well, okay, I think I see what you're getting at here, Helena. So even if they do believe at their core that they're absolutely perfect, they won't necessarily behave that way because that would just give them away, wouldn't it?
Yes, you're definitely onto what I'm trying to say here, is that they, like in a relationship, they tend to not acknowledge their fault. It kind of projects the idea of they feel like they're the only people who are right. But in reality, sometimes, if they tell themselves that enough times, they justify it, they kind of come to believe, that, well, yeah, it wasn't their fault, because shame is very painful to a personality X person. So by pushing away, any kind of responsibility, they minimize the shame and the associated um, pain of that. But when you say when they try to not act absolutely perfect, that would give them away. What do you mean by give them away?
Well, because if they just sort of bragged about their perfection, then, well, they would be pretty unlikable, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it'd be so easy to be like, oh, yep, definitely a personality X right there.
Exactly. So, and that's exactly what they're trying to avoid. Because if they know that they're going to come out and project this God syndrome that nobody likes, they're going to have the opposite effect of what they're trying to accomplish, is of people to think very highly of them. So even though their entire personality is programmed to not accept shame and not accept responsibility and have everything your fault, that doesn't mean they will always act that way. There's two types of personality X people. And one type is they will never apologize. I mean, they're feeling guilty. They're acting sheepish. Their actions show that, they're kind of trying to make up for it. They cleaned up the whole house. When you came home, they are being super nice to you. They went out of their way, so like their whole, behavior shows that they feel they were in the wrong, or I mean, they just change it, and they're not doing, whatever, they were in the wrong for. Let's say, they kicked your cat outside. You got upset, and, they insist that that was the right thing to do, but, eventually they come around and the cat's in, and, they're nice to the cat, but, they would never apologize and say, sorry, I screwed up, I was having a bad day, never. So that's one side. Again, we've got 16 personalities, so we've got different manifestations of personality X. But the opposite side of the spectrum is a person who would apologize all the time. Every time you get on them, oh, I'm sorry, I'm such a piece of crap. Yeah, I can't do anything right. I'm so screwed up, I'm sorry. Every time you mention something, they just totally fall apart in sackcloth and tears, and, they're so sorry. And that's what confusing to a lot of people when they're trying to diagnose personality X is that, they tend to look at a person who never says sorry and says, hey, well, mine always says he's sorry. And what's important here is to remember the underlying dynamics of this. Again, is this person all about themselves? Is that, their position in your eyes and, their well-being, their goals, is that what the center of that is? So a person who never apologizes and would still change their behavior, it's still a personality X, because the normal dynamics would be acknowledgement and saying, I am sorry. And by the fact that they're not doing that, it creates a certain part of dysfunction. But, if they're changing their behavior, then at least they have a degree of acknowledgement of your part in that. And a person who always apologizes but never changes their behavior, that is kind of a dead giveaway that it's a cover-up. Hey, if I say sorry, it's going to be overlooked, and that's my way of getting rid of the problem without actually solving it. I'm going to say I'm sorry, and I'm going to continue doing the exact same thing. And next time I get confronted on that, I'm just going to say I'm sorry, and I'm going to continue doing the same thing, and I don't really have to change anything about myself. So that's very important to remember. And that's the skill that you guys would have to develop if you took that trial period, is to determine if what the person is doing is actually genuine, or if it's an act aimed at a certain goal that they have. So one takeaway that I want you to walk away from this video is that when we're talking about personality X traits, what you gotta pay attention at is the underlying character. That person is focused on themselves. I mean, I'm not saying that, they have no reciprocity whatsoever, because a person who is totally incapable to reciprocating, to showing or giving any kind of love, is a psychopath. And yes, it's the same. It's kind of like the extreme, the personality X spectrum, but it's still a psychopath. Not very many people, thankfully, are a psychopath. If you're just a personality X and you're lower on that spectrum, you will give some love. The question is that if you're in a personality X relationship, what he gives and what you give are not equal. You give 70% and they're giving 30. 70-30, is, probably generous. It's usually 95-5 when it comes to that. And I'm saying in general, because at any given point, it's like somebody said, any relationship is not 50-50. Any relationship is 99-1, but make sure to take your turn. That's what I mean by bigger picture. So if you are seeing that the person is not being able to give more than 5%, being into themselves, if you're seeing the difficulty of accepting responsibility, of accepting blame, of dealing with things, really the fact of whether he does or does not apologize, like I say, it depends on the personality of that. You can't use that as a criteria. You got to look at the underlying dynamics. Does personality X admit to their flaws?
I would say so. I'd say yes. In a way, though, maybe they could admit to a flaw, but not the flaw. So I guess they're not really taking responsibility, are they?
Yeah, I guess I do see it this way too. And I can kind of see it going hand in hand with love bombing. Like someone can display classic personality X behavior of hurling insults at you and like putting you down, only to follow it all up later with a grand apology, like owning up to being such a jerk or whatever, but never ever for the core issue of being a personality X.
Right. So that's where love bombing, that is a very common term that comes up, and when even describing narcissistic relationship, right, or personality X relationship. So and what the usual examples that we hear of that is abusive situations. Somebody beats up their wife, their girlfriend, she's, in bruises and, bodily injuries. And the next day he brings her flowers and roses and acts like, oh, gee, I just had a bad day. So again, why they're doing this? Because they've learned this behavior and they know that it works. Because if they do that, they can get back in. Is there real remorse? No. So technically, like Stacy was saying, they're admitting to their flaws. Hey, I'm sorry, I screwed up. They're doing something. The underlying dynamics, though, is to not remedy your relationship. The dynamics is to remedy his image in your eyes and get things back under his control and get back things to normal. And I know it's easy to, when I give examples like this and we're just sitting here, comfortably talking about it, it seems to be, pretty simple and straightforward. When you're actually in that relationship, is how do you tell? And so what I want to finish this with is always think about underlying dynamics. Don't look at the, every single manifestation of, who said what and who yelled louder, or, how he went about things. Look at the underlying dynamics. If you're in a relationship with a person and you're trying to determine their personality X or not, that's already a sign that there's probably something there to make you wonder. If you put it on a trial period, let me remind you what you're looking for. Change. You're looking for some kind of progress. I thought I saw you try. Remember the song? So sometimes it's just a dream, but sometimes you see that they're actually trying to make the steps to make the change. That's your sign for deciding whether you want to stay or you want to go. Denial can be strong here, but that's where you need to be smart, and then you need to really take this seriously and know what you're going to do and what you're signing up for if you decide to stay once you make the decision to stay after the trial period. But what you're looking for is a person who is not able to give love back to you 50-50 on overall is a personality X person. They just are. It's reality. Let's nix the design. That's what they are. Now, whether you stay or go would depend on whether there is a hope for this relationship getting somewhere, or is he going to stay absolutely cold? And some people will make effort to remedy their problem, even though they're personality X. So there's no saying that, hey, just because he's personality X, it's totally incurable, your relationship is doomed. It's not. But are they or not? And that's the question that you need to answer for yourself. Is there going to be hope for this relationship? And he is the one on trial because you can handle it. That's how you got into this relationship. Does that person have potential for change? So if it's all a lie, and if he doesn't make any changes whatsoever, then don't be a fool in this situation. See through it. Don't go into the denial. Don't let yourself be played. It's basically that simple. If it's a lie, it's a lie. If it's an effort, however small, that it's an effort. But that's your challenge, to think things through and make the right call. A lot of it is intuitive, but most people who aren't a personality X are intuitive people because they're a caretaker. So by nature are intuitive. So you're equipped. All you have to do is put your effort to it. We are running out of time here, so I'm going to stop the recording. You guys who are watching, you have question, comments, there is a form underneath. Please submit it, and I will either answer them or we will go over them in the next video. But thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording here. Thank you.